Let me add to our coverage. NBC News White House Chief Correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, you broke this story. The president will address the nation at 7:30 to announce the killing of the most significant al-Qaeda leader since the successful raid that killed bin Laden. Talk about how this came to be, the president's role in this, and its significance. We were talking about this as a promise this president made a year ago when U.S. forces withdrew from Afghanistan. There was a commitment that counterterrorism operations would continue, that U.S. national security would be protected by precisely the kind of strike that appears to have taken out someone who has been sought since the attacks of 9/11. He helped orchestrate the attacks with bin Laden. I can't find the name of what, I don't know if he was bin Laden's assistant or right-hand man or what the intelligence community refers to him as. But Zawahiri has been pursued since those attacks.
You're absolutely right, Nicole, and you set it up so well. And we've been able to confirm this based on reporting from two sources familiar with the matter, myself and my colleague Ken Delanian. And what is significant about this is that he was really considered to be the ideological leader of al-Qaeda during the era of Osama bin Laden. And in some cases, he was considered to be more instrumental in the planning of the September 11th attacks than almost any other member of al-Qaeda at the time. And so this is someone who has been on the radar of the U.S. national intelligence for decades. And the fact that now the president is going to come out and announce this, and as you say, Nicole, the backdrop to this, the fact that President Biden, in the wake of that really botched withdrawal from Afghanistan that was so widely criticized, continued to stay on this piece of it, the counterterrorism piece of it, that was a promise that he made at the time. He will, I would anticipate, speak to that, speak to the importance of that, and speak to the fact that this now becomes yet a new chapter in the wake of the war in Afghanistan, and that they have continued to track these people who were responsible for the planning of September 11th, and then responsible for carrying out the vision of Osama bin Laden in the wake of his death, Nicole. And I think that's a significant piece of it as well. There was so much debate at the time about what, if any, role al-Zawahiri would play and how instrumental he would be as a leader. Would he be as forceful of a leader as Osama bin Laden was? And so all of that, of course, will be left to historians. But the fact that the president is going to come out and announce this is undoubtedly going to be a significant moment in his presidency. It does come against the backdrop, as Monica just laid out so well, of this president who was recovering from COVID, and then he had that rebound case. We did learn that he had a few lingering symptoms today. But again, clearly, this is something that he has been working on behind the scenes as he has also continued his recovery, as he has continued to work on things that are unfolding on the domestic stage, also dealing with this significant development on the world stage, Nicole.
He would be the fourth president to pursue al-Zawahiri. And I want to read something that the New York Times is reporting about where he was killed. According to an American analyst, the house that was struck was owned by a top aide to Haqqani, a senior official in the Taliban government, whom American officials say is close to senior al-Qaeda figures. It didn't take long. I don't know that it ever abated, but clearly the Taliban is still very much in bed with al-Qaeda based on where this al-Qaeda leader, notorious al-Qaeda leader, as you said, Kristen Welker, the ideological leader of al-Qaeda, was hiding in a Taliban government official's home.
And I think that when you compare, I mean, that new reporting by the New York Times makes me think about the operation to kill Osama bin Laden. And the fact that that was such a complicated effort to pull off. And you remember that now historic moment in the Situation Room where you had former President Barack Obama, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, watching this unfold in real time, and this moment by moment cliffhanger to see how this would all unfold, to find him where he was hiding out, and that they were able to kill Osama bin Laden. And that new reporting by the New York Times, I think, speaks to what could potentially be a different experience. Again, we're going to get more details when the administration holds a background briefing with reporters at the top of the hour. But I think that will be one of the things that we'll be looking for. What are the specific details? How complicated was this effort to carry out? And the fact that the White House is making it very clear. They say at this point that no civilians were killed in this operation. Now, of course, those are the types of details, Nicole, that will continue to report out in the coming days. What, if any, damage was done on the ground? What was the fallout? But again, this is a significant development, Nicole.